My son's wife threw my life's possessions into the trash and sneered, "You're not needed anymore, Vernon. Get out." I stood there looking at 40 years of memories scattered on the street like garbage, smiled quietly, and pulled out my phone to make one call. 3 days later, they had 89 missed calls and were frantically searching for me. They thought they'd erased me from their lives, but they had no idea what they'd just started. My name is Vernon Caldwell. I'm 58 years old, and I've been an electrician for most of my adult life. What happened to me could happen to any father who thinks family loyalty runs both ways. Let me tell you exactly how this whole mess unfolded. The first thing I noticed when my pickup truck coughed to a stop wasn't the house, it was the pile. 3 days of fishing up at Lucky Peak had left me relaxed and ready to get back to normal life. That peaceful feeling died the moment I saw my belongings scattered next to the dumpster, like someone's spring cleaning gone wrong. I sat in the truck for a full minute, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Those were definitely my things. My work boots, the good pair I kept for church, sitting upside down with mud in the treads. My fishing gear spread everywhere, tackle boxes split open, lures mixed with kitchen utensils and old photographs. The rod I'd used for 20 years lay snapped in half. Someone had taken everything I owned and thrown it away like actual trash. I climbed out slowly, my back stiff from the long drive. The cool May afternoon carried the smell of rain and something else, the musty odor of clothes that had been sitting outside too long. Walking toward the pile, each step felt heavier than the last. There, half buried under a tangle of winter coats, was our wedding picture from 35 years ago. The glass was cracked right across Ruth's face, splitting her smile with a jagged line. Ruth had been gone for 2 years now. Cancer took her, and seeing her photo treated like garbage hit me harder than I expected. That picture used to sit on the mantle, and Ruth would dust it every week like it was made of gold. My anniversary watch, the Timex Ruth had saved for months to buy me, lay face down in a puddle. Crystal shattered, leather band soaked through. I picked it up with shaking hands, water dripping between my fingers. Ruth had been so proud when she gave it to me, said it would last forever. The boxes told their own story, hastily packed, roughly handled, torn at the corners where they'd been dragged or dropped. My name was still visible on one side, written in Ruth's careful handwriting from our last move. The ink had run, making my own name look like a watercolor mistake. This wasn't some accident or city error. Someone had deliberately packed up my entire life and put it out with the trash. Someone had made a calculated decision to erase 58 years of existence. Now here's the thing, I needed answers, and I needed them fast. The key slid into the front door lock, turned halfway, then stopped dead. I tried again, applying more pressure, wiggling it like I'd done thousands of times before. Nothing. The lock wouldn't budge. They'd changed the locks on my own house. You have to understand, I'd been living in this place for 8 years. I'd rewired half the electrical system myself when we first moved in. I knew every switch, every outlet, every circuit breaker in that house. And now I couldn't even get through the front door. I pulled out my phone and called Gary first. My son would explain this mess, sort everything out. The phone rang 3 times before clicking to voicemail, his voice cheerful and recorded. "You've reached Gary Caldwell. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." "Gary, it's Dad. I just got back from fishing and all my stuff is on the street. The locks are changed. What's going on? Call me back right away." I tried Melissa next, though talking to my daughter-in-law always felt like negotiating a business deal. Same result, straight to voicemail. Her message was shorter, crisper. "You know what to do." Standing on my own front porch, locked out like a stranger, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't some emergency repair or miscommunication. Someone had planned this. Someone had waited for me to leave town, then systematically removed me from my own home. What happened next still makes my blood boil when I think about it. I walked over to Carl Thompson's house, figuring he'd seen something. Carl had been my neighbor for 8 years, borrowed my tools, shared beers on summer evenings. If anyone knew what happened, it would be Carl. "Carl, do you know what's going on here?" I gestured toward the pile of belongings. "All my stuff is on the street and I can't get into my house." His expression shifted, uncomfortable and evasive. "Sorry, Vernon. I haven't really noticed anything unusual. Maybe some kind of mistake." The lie hung between us like smoke. Carl spent most days at his front window, watching the neighborhood like a security guard. The man noticed when people got different newspapers for crying out loud. He knew exactly what had happened. "Look, if you need somewhere to make phone calls, you're welcome to come in. Thanks. But I'll manage." 4 hours passed like a slow bleed. I'd been sitting in an old lawn chair I'd found among my scattered belongings, sorting through what could be salvaged. Some things were ruined beyond repair, casualties of their hasty eviction. The whole time I kept thinking about how this could have happened, how my own family could do this to me. Their Honda pulled into the driveway just as the streetlights started flickering on. I'd been sorting through most of my belongings by then, making piles of what was salvageable and what was beyond hope. Some clothes could be washed, books that had only gotten damp might survive, but other items were casualties of their hasty eviction. The headlights swept across the pile as Melissa parked, illuminating the chaos like a crime scene. I stood up from the lawn chair, my joints screaming after hours in the cool air. Finally, someone who could explain this nightmare. Gary got out of the passenger side, his movements careful and deliberate. He looked older than his 35 years, shoulders slumped under some weight I couldn't identify. Melissa emerged from the driver's side with her usual efficiency, blonde hair perfect despite the long day, moving with the brisk confidence of someone who owned the place. Gary, Melissa, thank God you're here. I walked toward them, gesturing at the scattered belongings. What happened? Why are my things on the street? Someone changed the locks while I was fishing. Melissa didn't break stride, walking past me like I was invisible. She pulled grocery bags from the trunk with sharp, angry movements, each motion deliberate and dismissive. When she finally looked at me, her expression was cold enough to freeze water. Because you're no longer needed here, Vernon. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually took a step backward, blinking in confusion. What do you mean, not needed? This is my home, I live here. Lived, she corrected, slamming the trunk shut. Past tense. The mortgage is paid off now. Your job here is done. Take your junk and get out. My job? The phrase made no sense. Melissa, I don't understand. This is my house. I've been paying the mortgage for 8 years. Her smile was sharp as broken glass. You paid it off. Mission accomplished. We don't need you anymore. I turned to Gary, desperate for sanity in this madness. Son, what is she talking about? Tell me what's going on here. Gary couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the ground, hands shoved deep in his pockets, like a guilty child caught stealing cookies. Sorry, Dad, he mumbled, barely audible. We tried to make it work, but what I reached toward him, and he actually flinched away from my touch. Gary, look at me. I'm your father. I've lived in this house for 8 years. I pay for groceries, utilities, repairs. This is my home, Melissa laughed. A sound like breaking ceramic. Your home? You were a tenant, Vernon, a very useful tenant who paid all our bills and asked for nothing in return, but tenants can be evicted when they're no longer convenient. The cruelty of it stole my breath. I looked between them, my son avoiding my gaze, my daughter-in-law smiling with obvious satisfaction. The streetlight cast harsh shadows across their faces, making them look like strangers. I helped you buy this house, I said slowly, each word carefully measured. When you couldn't qualify for the mortgage, I co-signed. When you couldn't make payments, I covered them. When you needed money for Gary's car, I gave you my savings. Everything I had, I gave to this family, and we're grateful, Melissa said with mock sincerity. Really? We are. But gratitude doesn't mean we have to house you forever. You're old, Vernon. You take up space. You track mud through my clean house. You leave dishes in the sink and watch TV too loud. We want our lives back. Gary shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. My own son standing there while his wife dismantled our relationship with surgical precision. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike, helped with homework, supported through college, reduced to a silent accomplice in my exile. Where am I supposed to go? The question came out smaller than I intended, tinged with a vulnerability that made me hate myself. That's not our problem anymore. Melissa headed toward the front door, grocery bags in hand. You're a grown man, figure it out, Gary. I tried one last time, putting every ounce of paternal authority into his name. Look at me, son. He raised his eyes for just a moment, and what I saw there was worse than hatred. Complete, empty indifference, like I was already dead to him. The locks are changed, Melissa called over her shoulder. Don't try to get in. I'll call the police if I have to. The front door opened and closed, leaving me alone under the streetlight with my scattered possessions. The porch light came on, then immediately went off again. A clear message that I wasn't welcome even near the entrance. I stood there for a long moment, processing what had just happened. 35 years of fatherhood erased. 8 years of generosity forgotten. A lifetime of love and sacrifice dismissed like an inconvenient bill. But beneath the hurt, something else was growing, something harder and colder than the evening air. They thought they could use me up and throw me away like garbage. They thought they could steal everything I'd worked for and lock me out of my own life. The thing is, 40 years as an electrician had taught me a few lessons about power, real power. Not the kind that comes from changing locks or throwing tantrums, but the kind that comes from understanding how systems actually work. And I was about to give them a crash course in electrical engineering, 101. But first, I needed to understand exactly what kind of game they thought they were playing, and more importantly, what the rules really were. The next morning found me in the cleanest clothes I could salvage, sitting across from Arthur Hoffman in his downtown law office. Arthur was a sharp-eyed man in his 50s who specialized in property law and elder rights, the kind of attorney who'd seen enough family drama to know when something stunk. His office was all dark wood and legal books, the kind of place where serious business got handled by people who understood the difference between feelings and facts. I spread my folder of rescued documents across his mahogany desk, every paper I'd managed to pull from that pile of debris. "Tell me about the situation," Arthur said, accepting my folder with careful hands. I explained everything without emotional embellishment. 8 years of mortgage payments, gradual deterioration of family relationships, sudden eviction, changed locks. The whole sorry tale laid out like evidence in a courtroom. Arthur spread the documents across his desk systematically, examining each page with the methodical attention I recognized from my own work habits. When he reached the original deed and mortgage agreement, his eyebrows raised slightly. "Mr. Caldwell, according to these documents, you are the sole owner of the property in question." The words hung in the air like smoke from a welding torch. "What about the mortgage? Gary and Melissa live there. They said I was helping them buy their house. The mortgage was issued in your name only. You qualified for the loan. You've made all the payments, and the property tax records show you as the official owner. Your son and daughter-in-law have no legal claim to the house whatsoever." I leaned back in the leather chair, letting that sink in. "But they live there. They've been treating it like their home for 8 years. Living in a property doesn't establish ownership. At best, they could be considered tenants, though I don't see any formal lease agreement here. Legally, you have every right to reclaim your property and evict any unauthorized occupants." The satisfaction started in my chest and spread outward like warmth from a good meal. 8 years of being treated like a burden. 8 years of having my generosity thrown back at me, and all along they'd been living in my house, eating food I bought, using utilities I paid for in a home they had no legal right to occupy. "The mortgage has been fully satisfied as of last month," Arthur continued, reviewing the documents once more. "You own the property free and clear, worth approximately $420,000 in today's market. $420,000. I'd been living like a charity case in my own $420,000 house, grateful for the privilege of paying other people's bills. What are my options? You could demand they vacate immediately. You could begin formal eviction proceedings. You could sell the property and force them to relocate. As the legal owner, you have considerable leverage in this situation. But I had a better idea brewing. Something that would teach them the difference between charity and ownership in a way they'd never forget. I'd like copies of everything that establishes my ownership, and I need a recommendation for a good realtor." Arthur efficiently prepared copies while explaining the legal protections of property ownership. Within an hour, I had documentation proving beyond question that Gary and Melissa had been living rent-free in my house for 8 years. The spring morning felt different as I walked back to my truck. Warmer, brighter, full of possibilities that hadn't existed an hour earlier. I wasn't a homeless old man begging for shelter. I was a property owner who'd been temporarily inconvenienced by squatters. Helen Walsh's real estate office was in one of those converted Victorian houses downtown, all professional charm and business efficiency. She turned out to be exactly what I needed, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who worked weekends for clients serious about buying or selling. "Mr. Caldwell, what kind of timeline are we looking at for your property sale?" "As quickly as possible. I need the house listed immediately and shown to serious buyers starting Monday." She pulled up property records on her computer, nodding as details filled the screen. "This is a nice neighborhood, 4-bedroom colonial, good condition from what I can see online. What's your asking price range?" "Market value, but the buyer needs to be ready to move immediately. The current occupants will need to relocate quickly." Helen's expression flickered slightly, probably wondering about family dynamics, but she maintained professional focus. "What about the current occupants? Do they need time to find new housing? They're adults. They'll figure something out." We spent an hour reviewing market conditions, pricing strategies, and showing schedules. Helen was efficient and thorough, treating the sale like any other business transaction. By 400, I'd signed listing agreements and arranged for professional photography Monday morning. "I'll have the property on the MLS system by Tuesday," Helen promised. "Given the market conditions and location, I expect serious interest within the first week." Perfect. By the time Gary and Melissa realized what was happening, their housing situation would already be beyond their control. Now here's where things get interesting. See, 40 years as an electrician had taught me more than just how to wire houses. I knew how to install equipment without people noticing, how to work in tight spaces, how to make modifications that would never be detected by amateur eyes. Sunday night, while Gary and Melissa were out at some dinner party, I used skills they'd forgotten I had. Getting into the house wasn't hard when you know every wire and circuit like the back of your hand. I'd wired that place myself when they first bought it, run every cable, installed every outlet. A few small recording devices strategically placed and powered by the electrical system I designed. Nothing illegal, I was the property owner after all. The beauty of being an electrician is that you understand how to hide things in plain sight, tucked behind outlet covers and inside junction boxes where nobody thinks to look. For 2 weeks, I documented everything they said. And let me tell you, what I heard would have made your blood boil. Melissa coaching Gary on how to justify my removal, their casual conversations about getting rid of the old man, their discussions about my supposed mental decline that gave them the right to make decisions for me. The recordings were pure gold, clear evidence of elder manipulation, financial abuse, and conspiracy to defraud a property owner. Everything I needed to make sure they could never claim ignorance or paint themselves as victims. During those 2 weeks, I also did something else that felt pretty good. I started planning my exit strategy, not just from the house, but from their entire toxic world. I'd spent 8 years walking on eggshells, being grateful for scraps, accepting less and less until I was practically invisible in my own home. Time to remind them what invisible actually looked like. Monday morning, I was at Boise Airport with a single carry-on bag and a heart lighter than it had been in years. The ticket counter agent was helpful when I explained my flexible travel plans. I'd like to book a flight somewhere warm. I told her, doesn't matter where as long as I can leave today and stay as long as I want. There's a flight to Cancun in 3 hours. Open return ticket. Perfect. Book it. I turned off my phone before boarding and dropped it in my carry-on bag. For the next 3 weeks, Gary and Melissa would discover what it felt like when someone they'd taken for granted simply vanished from their lives. The resort in Cancun was exactly what someone reclaiming his life needed. Anonymous, comfortable, and completely disconnected from any responsibilities back home. My room faced the ocean through sliding glass doors that opened onto a private balcony, and for the first time in years, I had nowhere to be and nothing to prove to anyone. I spent my days reading paperback novels by the pool, eating fresh seafood, and learning how to relax again. Other guests moved through their vacation routines, but I was operating on a different timeline entirely. While they counted down days until returning to normal life, I was building a new normal from scratch. Every few days, I'd check in with Helen Walsh about the house sale. The messages were always good news. Multiple showings, serious interest, a young couple who'd fallen in love with the neighborhood and could close quickly. I authorized everything from my beach chair, signing electronic documents between margaritas and afternoon naps. The best part was the silence. No Melissa sighing when I used the kitchen. No Gary looking through me like I didn't exist. No walking on eggshells in my own home. Just peace, warm ocean air, and the satisfaction that comes from finally taking control of your own life. 3 weeks later, I returned to Boise with a tan that spoke of extended leisure and a perspective that distance had clarified. The flight landed on schedule, and the taxi ride to my temporary downtown apartment felt like visiting a different city. I wasn't the same man who'd left in desperation. I was someone who'd remembered what it felt like to matter. My phone had been off the entire time, and when I finally powered it up in the taxi, the screen exploded with notifications. 89 missed calls, dozens of voicemails and texts that kept coming in even as I scrolled through the chaos. The first few voicemails were confused but demanding. Gary's voice tight with barely controlled anger. Dad, call me back immediately. There are people walking through our house taking pictures. What the hell is going on? Melissa, sharper and more accusatory. Vernon, I don't know what game you're playing, but you need to stop this right now. Call us back. But as the hours and days progressed, the tone shifted dramatically. Anger gave way to confusion, confusion to panic, panic to desperation. Gary again, hours later. Dad, please, we can't reach you anywhere. The realtor says she's working for you. This can't be legal. Where are you? Melissa, her voice cracking. Vernon, this is our home. You can't just sell our house out from under us. We've been calling everyone we know. The most revealing message came from Gary late in the second week, his voice barely holding together. Dad, I keep thinking about that night when you came back from fishing. The way Melissa talked to you, the way I just stood there and let it happen. I know we messed up, but please, just call me back. Finally, some recognition of consequences. Only took them discovering they weren't actually in control of their own living situation. But the best message was from Helen Walsh, professional and to the point. Mr. Caldwell, excellent news. David and Jennifer Morrison have made a cash offer of $415,000. They love the neighborhood and want to close as soon as possible. They're pre-approved and ready to move forward immediately. I was pulling my suitcase from the taxi when familiar voices called my name from across the parking lot. Gary and Melissa approached like refugees from their own lives. 3 weeks of searching had left visible marks. Gary looked 10 pounds thinner, his usual neat appearance replaced by rumpled clothes and hollow eyes. Melissa's perfectly maintained image had cracked, revealing someone who'd spent too many sleepless nights facing consequences she'd never considered possible. Vernon, finally, Melissa's voice carried relief mixed with desperation. "We've been looking everywhere for you, Dad. Please, we need to talk. Don't sell the house. We can work something out." I set my suitcase down carefully, noting how their voices had changed. A month ago, they'd spoken to me with dismissive authority. Now they sounded like people begging for something they couldn't afford to lose. "Work out what?" "Exactly." "We drove to every friend you've ever mentioned," Melissa said, words rushing together. "Your old co-workers, that fishing club, even Ruth's sister in Twin Falls. Nobody knew where you'd gone. We were desperate." The word hung between us like smoke. Desperate. A month ago, I'd been the desperate one sitting among garbage bags while they locked me out of my own house. Interesting choice of words. A month ago, you told me I wasn't needed anymore, remember? Gary finally looked up, his face showing the kind of regret that only comes from watching comfortable assumptions crumble in real time. "Dad, we made a mistake. Maybe we spoke too quickly, acted too harshly. Maybe." The word came out sharper than intended. "You threw my belongings on the street like garbage. You changed the locks on my own house. You told me to disappear from your lives, and now you're surprised that I took your advice. We can pay rent," Melissa interjected desperately. "Whatever the new owners want, we'll pay it. That's between you and them. I'll give them your number if they're interested in tenants." "Dad, we're family." Gary's voice cracked on the last word. I stopped and turned to face him directly. "Family, a month ago, you stood there while your wife told me I wasn't needed. You watched her throw me out like trash and said nothing. You chose her over me, Gary. That was your decision to make and you made it." The next morning, I was at the title company signing papers that transferred ownership from myself to David and Jennifer Morrison, newlyweds who'd fallen in love with the house and planned to raise their family there. They were everything Gary and Melissa weren't: grateful, enthusiastic, financially responsible, and genuinely excited about home ownership. "Thank you for accepting our offer so quickly," Jennifer said as we completed the paperwork. "We know other people were interested." "You reminded me why houses exist," I replied. "They're for families who want to build something together, not for people who take blessings for granted." The check for $415,000 felt surprisingly light in my hands, but it represented more than money. It represented freedom from ungrateful relatives, freedom from guilt-based living situations, freedom to choose how I spent my remaining years without considering other people's convenience. By Friday, I'd closed my temporary apartment lease and loaded my truck with everything I actually needed. The rest went to charity. Ruth would have approved of the simplicity. I was driving north toward Coeur d'Alene, where lake views and mountain air promised the kind of peace that came from choosing your own neighbors instead of being stuck with relatives who confused proximity with loyalty. I'd already put a deposit down on a nice cabin with a workshop where I could tinker with electrical projects and maybe do some consulting work for people who appreciated experience. In my rearview mirror, Boise shrank to highway perspective, just another city where someone had learned the difference between charity and ownership. Gary and Melissa would figure out their housing situation eventually. Maybe the Morrisons would rent to them. Maybe they'd find somewhere else. Either way, they'd face their future without the safety net they'd spent 8 years assuming would always catch them. The thing is, justice didn't require cruelty, just consequences. They taught me that family was conditional, that gratitude had limits, that love could be discarded when it became inconvenient. I'd proven to be an excellent student. The highway stretched ahead like possibility itself, leading toward a life where appreciation wouldn't be taken for granted, and family would mean something deeper than convenient obligation. I had money in the bank, skills that were still valuable, and most importantly, the wisdom to never again mistake being needed for being valued. At 58, I was just getting started, and for the first time in years, I was building something for someone who actually deserved it: me. The road ahead looked pretty damn good from where I was sitting. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give ungrateful people is exactly what they ask for, and I'd just given Gary and Melissa the independence they claimed to want. 40 years of paying other people's bills had taught me that respect isn't earned through generosity, it's commanded through boundaries.